In some areas, we have the sector working groups that involve the implementing partners of Office of the Prime Minister, civil societies, and they're chaired by heads of departments. In some districts, that's not the case. We also found out that there was an issue with the planning, budgeting for local government. Our government uses the fiscal financial year, and yet the implementing partners have the calendar year. So the implementing partners would go and ask certain districts, and specifically, I think that issue was raised in Lamour, where they would say, this is what we can do, and then at the end of the financial year, they haven't done. And yet the district had already written it off, thinking the implementing partner would handle that. We also found out that there were no MOUs to really guide the interaction between the implementing partners and the government, as well as the local government. Another issue that came out very clearly for us was the fact that there was a strain on social service delivery, which I'm sure some of the issues the cow from Adjumani will be able to elaborate them more, but local governments are making their budgets based on the 2014 census, and yet we have integrated our health sector, education sector, so the constraint on social service delivery, including water, was very visible. And then also we found out that in as much as we don't have a clear stipulated interaction guidelines, in some groups, in some districts, we have focal people. Like Koima, we found out that the deputy cow was the focal person for refugee management, and in Lamour it was the district planner. And then legal and policy framework, number one that came out clearly for us was the fact that with our open door policy and the integration that we've taken on, it is very difficult to run away from the fact that we need to include the role of the local government. If the situation was different, if we didn't have the integration, if we didn't have the settlements and had the camps, maybe the story would have been different right now. And then also we found out that the law, the Refugee Act, was predicated on the assumption of the uniformity of all the district host communities. And yet in Lamour, Yumbe, and Moyo, it is the citizens, the local, that gave their land for the settlement to be put in place, compared to Changwali and others that were demarcated and the land is owned by government. And in Changwali specifically, we're able to meet the LC3, who told us, and the camp commander, who told us how the land issue in Changwali has caused internally displaced persons who are local communities. So the land belonged to the government, but at some point we had the locals, because the refugees were not very many, and so the locals took part of the land. But because of the influxes and all that was happening in Congo, the locals had to take part of the land. Now, when the influxes became increasing, the refugees increased, government wanted to take their land back to give it to the locals and to the refugees. And now this caused a serious contention. And I'm happy to say that we have Honorable Muhaire, who represents that area, and the issue was really bad. At the time we were conducting the study, the camp commandant couldn't even take us to where the land was, because it was the situation was really intense. Financing. What came out clearly for us was the refugee financing is lacking. We appreciate the ReHope, the Dr. D programs, and all others. Recently, we had a meeting with the Minister of Finance, who told us World Bank has promised to give us more money on this. But then I think one thing that was raised by members from the host community, members of parliament, was how are we preparing the local government to receive this extra money that is outside the budget? How are we going to manage the ReHope, the Dr. Deep, together with the normal budgeting process? Also, the fact that I mentioned earlier of the budgeting based on the 2014 census, and now we have extra people, and before the verification, in Adjumani we had more refugees than the locals. I am sure after the verification, a little bit has changed. And then also specifically on the impact on social service delivery, we had issues like education, water, sanitation that remained a challenge. In some of the schools that we were able to visit, we had a very huge ratio population, teacher ratio, student ratio was really too big. The issue of environment. It came out very clearly for us, and this morning I would like to urge all of us to really find ways of discussing and understanding how the impact of the environment is going to cause us. Even after refugees have left Uganda, how are we going to be able to manage the issue of environment? Infrastructure, and the fact that the social service indicators had really worsened because of the influxes. And we made a number of recommendations, and one of them was expedition of the refugee policy consideration by cabinet, because we believe right now we're operating on assumption that yes, it's an open door policy, but we don't have what to really go back and refer to it. We also made a recommendation of utilization of contingent funds to address the emergent situations in host districts, with hope that it will release the pressure from the local government. And then also, we recommended that the allocation of non-conditional grants to cater for the increased demand of social service delivery, and then also scaling up investment in environmental mitigations. Are there areas that we can really come as civil society organizations, implementing partners and government to address the issue of environment? Can we give them an alternative? Instead of cutting trees, can we have refugees being provided with an alternative to use? And we're able to hold a number of advocacy meetings, but I would mention specifically the Presidential Affairs Committee, the Budget Committee on the financing. We also were able to meet Public Service and Local Government Committee. I am happy to report some members of the committees are here, including the chairperson of the Public Service and Local Government Committee. The policy issues that we raised, I have mentioned. If we've taken the direction of open door policy and integration, it is very important to include the role of local government in planning, coordination, and management of refugees. It is also important to make sure that we have the proper reporting structures. You don't know who reports to who. Is it the UNHCR that is supposed to report to OPM only, and yet they're operating with local government? Should it be the local government to report to UNHCR? We feel like those are the areas that really need to be addressed. And then, aside from the advocacy, we've held a number of meetings, and one of them is SEPA Connect. And some of the issues and the questions that have been raised by the people we've engaged, and most importantly, the civil society and the youth of this country, had about 4 questions that I would like to leave all of us here thinking about them. The integration approach. What does it mean for Uganda's demographic in the next 5-10 years? 2, what is the government and the implementing partners doing to save the environment? And 3, was Uganda ready for the open door policy? Or is it something that we are being praised for and yet at our back door we're suffering? And then 4, what happens if implementing partners do not take their part of the bargain? And this came out specifically on the follow-up of the Solidarity Summit that was held here, and a lot of money that was promised. And recently the matter came on the floor, and the Prime Minister informed members of Parliament that Uganda, out of the $539 million that was promised, Uganda received only 1.5. We have an open door policy. We are giving education, health, all those services. But this money, the other part of the partners are not doing their part of the bargain. What happens? And one of the examples that was given to us that I feel I should share with you this morning was Honorable Bahati said, if I come for your wedding and I promise to give you 5 million shillings and I don't give you, will you take me to police? Certainly not. I am happy we have the implementing partners, those who will be in charge of coordinating. If you come and say we appreciate Uganda's open door policy, but then again promise things that we can't deliver, that means it causes constraints on our side. Are we on the open door policy alone, or all of us here are looking at it the same way we're looking at it? Thank you very much.
You know, the conversation we're having today, it's a continuation of a discussion we've had for a long time. I see my friend from Lamour, And many of you I recognize. I see Gerald Menya, Honorable. Now he works with the OPM. He has shifted roles. He used to be a member of parliament. Now he's with the OPM dealing with matters of refugees. I don't know how that works, but from purely oversight responsibility, and now you are there trying to do the things you used to criticize. I don't know how that works, but I'm sure you're doing a good job, because when you're in parliament, actually you used to do a tremendous job, and we remember you for that. The MC said they have been anxiously waiting for me. My time was 11 o'clock, and 11 o'clock on the dot, I was here. So you could not have been waiting for me before that. I like keeping time, because God gave all of us 24 hours. I have my 24, you have your 24. Never interfere with my 24, and it's out of courtesy that I will never interfere with your 24 hours. So when you say 11 o'clock, be there at 11 o'clock. I always try to do that, because I respect you and the time God has given you, because you planned for them. You know, the discussions we have, it's not premised on nothing. It has a basis. It has a history, and has progressions that now must take into account changing situations. Things have changed so much that if the drafters of the 1951 conventions were to sit around and watch what was going on, they would wonder what they did. Because things have changed so much that even by 1967, they had to review the 1951 convention. It came into force 28th July, and this month, on the 28th, I'm sure there will be a commemoration, if none has been done before, and that will be about 68 years now of implementation of the Refugee Convention, which by design would not call it the Geneva Convention, because the Geneva Conventions now we only relate it to those relating to wars and other matters. So that we make that distinction. Otherwise, it should have also been called the Geneva Convention. But we already have that reference to the one on laws and regulation of laws. So as we walk into 68 years of existence of the Refugee Convention, what has changed? And how have we adopted to those changes? You all remember that by 1951, what they were really talking about were wars in Europe, and the impact of the wars in Europe, and the impact of the displacement that the war in Europe had caused. So the 1951 convention was basically dealing with the European situations. And that is why, in the definition, they said events preceding 1st of January 1951. And if you talked about events preceding those 1951, then you remember that in 1948, the United Nations sat and agreed on the United Nations conventions after the war had ended a few years earlier. So it's based on a war that existed. It's based on the impact of war. It is based on the human movement that was caused by the Second World War. So the world sat and agreed on these things. And there were geographical definitions, like I said. So in 1967, they removed this definition. Now, from 1967, there has been no proper update to try and capture the situation of refugees worldwide. So countries are taking responsibility of beginning to make modifications, context-specific modifications about what they need to do with refugees. The Europeans, on the other side, are blocking walls now. They're hiring other countries to keep their refugees. Sometimes they turn them into slaves. Yes, the Europeans have paid Libya and other countries to capture these people who are going away and keep them. And when they keep them, sometimes they mistreat them, and sometimes they turn them into slaves. The Europeans don't want people around their borders. The discussion on migration, especially when it has to do with the Europeans, is a very complicated discussion now. If you want to discuss issues of migration with the Europeans, they prefer to look the other way. But those are the situations we live in right now. The question is, how do we make modifications to deal with this challenge of human movement and make those who move be as comfortable as possible? Because they move with certain rights. How do we make country-specific situations to try and deal with the issues of refugees? Oh, it's bad. So I can now step down. I have seen the report that has been presented by my friends who did this research, when they talked about global perspectives of the refugee phenomenon. And that's what I was reflecting on. They also talk about the current state. As a country, we are very popular, but our people, many of them are suffering. Those host communities are not living their usual life, the life they used to live. The question is, who is not doing their job? Or who is pretending to do another person's job without the qualification and the requisite infrastructure to deal with it? Who is pretending to do things they should not be doing? And who is pretending not to do things they should be doing? These are the discussions we should have. And I was hoping that by this time, because this conversation has taken so long, I was hoping that by this time, we should have been able to present an analysis of the shortfalls of what we already have, the frameworks that we have proposed, the legal infrastructure that we have in place. Of course, we make comments on the conventions, the actors that have decided that actually the convention should be reviewed. But I had a meeting with one guy. He was a refugee from Ethiopia. He stayed in the United States. And then he started working for the refugee UNHCR. And he climbed the ranks to a very high level. But now he's retired. So I met him and I said, "See, Honorable, if you send back the refugee convention for review in the United Nations, it will never come out. They will kill it. It cannot be amended. It can only be killed by countries because things have changed so much. That's why since 1967, there has not been any collective United Nations-based attempt to review the convention, because the Europeans would be the first to pull out of it. And so many other people would pull out of it. With Donald Trump building a wall, and so many other people trying to do everything possible to stop human movement across borders. The United Nations Convention on Refugees would be killed by the members of the United Nations. That's what he said. And looking at what is happening in our country right now, I think that is a very valid argument. When they come and hold a meeting in Uganda, they call it what? The Solidarity meeting. Away from Europe, away from the US. And we Ugandans are proud to host it, Solidarity Meet for refugees. The reason is they want discussions about refugees as far away from their place as possible. And Uganda just happens to be the willing victim of this situation that everybody does not want to touch. So where are we on these matters of refugees? The refugee situation is unavoidable. The refugee situation is disruptive. You have a budget and you have planned for a district and the population is 100,000 people, and all of a sudden you have 300,000 people showing up in that district. It's disruptive. But what makes it even more complicated is our systems of how we receive and deal with refugees. The definitions are there. We're not inventing anything. The question is, if war should break out in a neighboring country, what systems does a country like Uganda put in place to be able to deal with that situation? And of course, now you're not only talking about wars, and yet that's what the convention specifically deals with. Issues of persecution, that's what the convention specifically deals with. The convention does not deal with issues of economic problems, does not deal with issues of people fleeing from environmental challenges. It doesn't deal with that. That's the area that needed to review to expand the definition. Now, as a country, what systems do we set in place at the reception centers for people coming into our country for us to systematically receive them? You have heard Honorable Muhindu saying, nobody knows the actual statistics. How is that even possible? How is that even possible? Yeah, well, it is happening, so it's possible. At Malaba, at Busia, we know everybody that has come into Uganda. There are systems that deal with this. At Entebbe International Airport, we know everybody that has come and got out of Uganda. So what is different with the refugee situation? Here is what is different. There's no system. People look the other side. And other people who should not be there at all are the ones who show up to receive refugees. Who should be at the reception center? And what systems, what protocols must be followed as refugees come in? Oulanyah Jacob comes as a refugee and accesses a border, crosses. Who must he meet first? If there are systems functioning, he should meet the full force of the state of Uganda. And those are the people who should ask the first questions. Who are you? Where are you going? What are you coming to do here? Should be the state of Uganda, not OPM. It should be internal security. It should be the police. It should be the immigration people who should receive these people. After they have stated what they are and what they are coming to do, then they are handed over through UNHCR, who must be there. That this particular person has come, is seeking asylum. Then the convention kicks in. So I now take Jacob Oulanyah under control, because it is the state. This is somebody who is foreigner without probably any documents. He's an alien. They use that word, which is very bad. So they come in, they escort me to UNHCR, who does the entries, the checking, and all these things. Now to say that some people even come with the guns, how is that even possible? How is that even possible? It is the responsibility of UNHCR to receive these people, document them, and prepare them in a temporary holding place. Then have discussions with the host country, which is now Uganda, that we need space. We have this number of people who have run away from situations in their own country. We need an arrangement to accommodate them. Then that is now where the country of Uganda will assign a place and allow UNHCR to set camp. At the camp, there is an entry process. People entering the camp are known. You go to the camps in Kenya, where our people went. Do you find this kind of nonsense that we have in this country? Go. Here, what is it called? Kibera or Kenya. Go and find out what systems they used. And they keep the refugees in the camps. Because they are refugees. They are not citizens of this country. Some of them have been stateless. The question is, how now do we make refugees compete with the citizens? It only happens in this country. How does a refugee compete with a citizen? It's something that we need to discuss. So when they are received and put in the camps, it is the responsibility of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to look after them, create systems, build infrastructure, put facilities in place to look after them, including feeding them, clothing them, treating them, educating them. It's not you, CEO of Germany. Where's your budget to deal with this? Wait, do you have a budget for refugees? That is passed by your council? No. So how does it all of a sudden become the responsibility of a Germany district to feed refugees, to treat refugees, to educate refugees, to clothe them? How does it come the responsibility of these people? You tell me. You are more knowledgeable on this subject than I am. But you tell me. The term host communities is only in Uganda. There is no other place in the world where there is something called host communities for refugees. It's only in Uganda. It's a term created. I don't want to use bad words. Refugees only have host countries, not host communities. Communities don't host refugees. UNHCR hosts refugees in another country. We need a complete overhaul of how we are doing things. It's embarrassing. It's even bad manners. Because now we make our own citizens become secondary. Because the refugees are receiving money from the UNHCR, they're receiving money from Germany, they're receiving money from OPM, they're receiving money from Oulanyah. Yes, refugees have rights. They have rights to health, rights to education, right to, all those rights that accrue to a human being. They have those rights. But who is responsible for them? Not the government of Uganda. If it is the government of Uganda, it is through an arrangement with UNHCR. An implementing agency is UNHCR. Yes, it is. I know when I say this, I'm stepping on toes. Because there are people who now use those as cows for milking. I've said it. And that is why the policy gets so confusing. The numbers cannot tally because people are putting their own numbers and they are there running around. They don't even sleep in their houses. They sleep near the camps now. We need to rethink these things as policy people. Being a refugee anybody can be a refugee. But you want to know the set of rules that will apply to you when that situation should catch up with you. And you don't want a situation where if you stray from a camp into the community, people will beat you up. because there are now hostilities. If there's a group of parliamentarians, I want you to go and look at what happened in Kenya with the two camps that are in northwestern Kenya. See how they have handled. Have they dismantled them now? How they processed those people, those who needed to go. How planes came and took those people, some of them to the United States, some of the Norway and other of those countries, the Nordic countries. How these processes were done. Go and study those things so that we can advise our governments better. Then in Uganda, we have refugees permanent and pensionable. No. And we even give them land. They are the best producers of matoke, and we are happy about it. A refugee, when they come to Uganda, where they put them is temporary. Because if Uganda cannot grant them asylum, they seek elsewhere. And they appeal, you have the people who are barred from seeking refugee status, like criminals, that's my colleague was talking about. But they're here, criminals, even armed. And we're feeding them and treating them well. So I support the proposals that have been made by this research, and the principal one is that we must have a review of the policy that we use to deal with the situation. And that policy should be anchored on the convention, which is now stale. If we are making country-specific modifications, for example, making the refugees a little more comfortable, giving them land and things like that, well, that would be modifications that we can make. But is it a permanent situation? A refugee camp can be permanent, like Native Valley, it has been there for many years. But the occupants cannot be permanent. There should be systems of processing these people, and some of them going to... Now, a refugee graduates from that, finishes a primary school. Where does the refugee go? To secondary. So they also build a secondary school there? And they finish HSC. Where do they go? They also build a university in the camp? There should be systems. That's all I am saying. There should be systems. A refugee is a refugee, unless the status of that person changes. That person will remain a refugee. Some of them even stateless. That person will remain a refugee. Try, go and seek asylum. I'll give you a testimony of a friend. They went seeking asylum. Now he works in the UK. He's an economist, even has a PhD now. They went, they were received. They were taken as if they were prisoners. Locked up and taken into prison-like situation. The man stayed there for 7 years. In a camp. 7 years. Prison-like situation with barricades and electrified wires on top of the walls. He stayed there for 7 years. Appeals. Eventually, some lawyers from the UK made arrangements, they made interventions, and this person was cleared, and the person was eventually granted asylum by the United Kingdom. And he was taken there. He has been there. Now he comes to Uganda because situations have changed. The situation that made him go there have since changed, so now it's back and forth. But when he tells you his story, then you understand what I'm talking about. There should be a system that recognizes that refugees are refugees and should be treated as such. and the responsibility of the host communities, host countries, to deal with UNHCR. How do you expect the CEO of Germany to enter a memorandum of understanding with the UNHCR? Forgive me, please. The CEO of Germany is now drafting an agreement, signing it with the lawyers of the district and the councillors sitting presiding over these matters with UNHCR and signing MOUs. God help us. Haven't you signed an MOU? As who? You are not a state. You are not a party to the convention. Now you are making agreements with UNHCR. Who are you? You know, the open door policy we have adopted is now open. It's so open that very soon, even LC1s are going to enter into memorandum of understanding with the UNHCR. LC1 chairperson with his rubber cut stamp. I give you this land. LC1, UNHCR. They have entered an agreement. What abuse? Uganda is a country, and we should let Uganda be a country. I don't mean to undermine the CEO of Ajumani, but it does not have the infrastructure to negotiate an agreement with UNHCR. It doesn't have it. It doesn't have it. I have a case of where a district went and the council said, for us, we just want a football stadium as a district. Give us a football stadium and you have everything free. So they came and built a state-of-the-art football stadium for these people. And that was all they wanted. It's there, your neighbors. Is it not true? Is it not true? Menya, is it not true? Huh? Now, a district council, we all know what district councils are. They come and say, they move a motion, for this district, the most important thing we want is a football stadium. Tell me about how that is going to impact on that old woman, old man in the village, a cripple in the village, and all those people who are now going to be affected by all these agreements. Tell me about how it will impact on these ones. I stand for review of policy. I stand by it. All the others will follow, whether M&E, monitoring and evaluation by OPM, contingency fund, where money should be found, for more funds. That should hinge on the policy that we should evolve on our relationship with UNHCR. Since there may never be any chance to review the Refugee Convention, country must be alert and they must be alive to situations how they deal with the UNHCR. UNHCR is funded by the United Nations and member states of it. It has funds. It doesn't have money, it will just do this. And the money will come. Why are we making our people sweat? So let's have a discussion. Let's move away from fact-finding now. We have gone past that stage. Let's now start proposing policy options.